Well, in Zimbabwe, President Robert Mugabe is under pressure from regional leaders to make reforms that will bring peace to the country and pave the way for democratically held elections. Many are describing it as the toughest stance on Zimbabwe by its neighbors. A recent statement from several members of the Southern African Development Community condemning the increasing violence in the country. Prime Minister Morgan Tsvangirai accuses Mr. Mugabe and his party of the violence. He recently met with members of the summit of the Organ Troika on Politics, Defense and Security Cooperation, which drew up the communique, including Zimbabwean mediator and South African President Jacob Zuma. Mr. Tsvangirai briefed the group on the series of arrests, intimidation and harassment of his ministers, parliamentarians, supporters and other activists. He has also accused Mr. Mugabe and his party of stalling on the implementation of the global political agreement, which would pave the way for elections. Mr. Mugabe and his party deny the accusations. Tomás Salamao is SADC's executive secretary.
There must be an immediate end of violence, intimidation, hate speech, harassment, and any other form of action that contradicts the letter and spirit of the global political agreement.
President Mugabe has criticized the SADC leaders, saying Zimbabwe is a sovereign country and that he will not be dictated to even by his neighbors. He says Mr. Zuma should stick to facilitating dialogue, not prescribing anything. Mr. Mugabe also accuses Tsvangirai's Movement for Democratic Change party of trying to influence the SADC and the African Union into prescribing how Zimbabwe should be run. Mr. Mugabe has vowed to nationalize all Western-owned companies in Zimbabwe, despite concerns by Tsvangirai that it will drive away investors.
Listen, Britain and America, this is our country. Right? If you have companies which would want to work in our mining sector, they are welcome to come and join us, but we must have our people in those companies as the major shareholders.
Many say much has changed for the good in Zimbabwe since Mugabe, Tsvangirai and Arthur Mutambara, also of the Movement for Democratic Change, formed the unity government 2 years ago. The country has adopted the dollar as the official currency, easing the cash crisis. Once scarce food is now available, media, though still restricted, has improved with the licensing of several newspapers, including the return of the Daily News, shut down in 2003. However, the political strain remains. Tsvangirai recently called for a divorce from the unity government, citing a breakdown in the relationship. If and when the elections will be held remains unclear, as the nation also awaits a new constitution that will outline the framework for elections, term limits and rights for the Zimbabwean people. Well, with me now is Ashweat Mukundu, a journalist and political analyst from Zimbabwe. Ashweat, it's so good to have you in the studio with us. So, of course, you're just coming from Zimbabwe, so you have some fresh insight for us. First of all, what do you make of this, what is being described as this toughest stance that SADC has taken on Zimbabwe, specifically President Mugabe, to date?
It's an expression of the frustration that the regional bloc has on the slow pace of reform in Zimbabwe. A key deliverable of the SADC community to the international community on the Zimbabwean crisis is a free and fair election. And that won't be possible in the current environment of politically motivated violence and also intransigence on the part of President Mugabe and his party in refusing to fulfill the issues in the global political agreement. So we are seeing the regional bloc realizing that there is something seriously wrong in terms of the commitment of President Mugabe to the unity government and fulfilling those things that are in the global political agreement.
I was just reading in the Herald today that the negotiators of the global political agreement actually met in Harare yesterday. I'm not sure if this is in pressure to the SADC communique, but what about these elections? Are they really likely to happen this year, considering that even the constitution is not ready yet? We're already in March.
It's an issue that we are all grappling with. I think it's important to say that without the blessings of the SADC community, it will be impossible, or if not difficult, for President Mugabe to push for an election in 2011. Another key issue that the SADC community said in the communique is that an election can only take place after a new constitution has been enacted. And so far, we are only looking at having the new constitution and the referendum towards the end of 2011. So I'm not sure that it will be possible to have an election in 2011. It's best, I think, Zimbabwe have an election either mid or 2011, or maybe in the first 3 or 4 months of 2011.
Do you think this unity government will withstand, considering that there's so much friction between President Mugabe, Mr. Tsvangirai, and he, as we just mentioned in the package, called for a divorce recently. He's been consulting with the regional leaders that President Mugabe is not yielding.
Despite, I think, the infighting and the dysfunctionality of the unity government, I don't think that any party in this government would want to be the first to pull out. They all know the consequences of taking the first move in this talk of a divorce. Of course, President Mugabe would want to frustrate the MDC through the arrest of the members of parliament, through the perpetrating violence on its supporters, so that the MDC can take the first step to walk out of the unity government, and that can be used as an excuse to then call for a new election. But I'm sure Morgan Tsvangirai and the MDC are too smart to know that strategy.
We mentioned in the package also how there have been some changes. Among them, which you're very familiar with, is in the media. The fact that now there have been licenses for newspapers to operate. There have been several ever since this licensing was issued, but not for TV and radio yet. What does this change mean? It's a slight opening that we need to acknowledge, that at least now there are 2 privately owned newspapers or independent newspapers that are publishing. So there is a sense of some access to alternative information. But a key thing that we need to note is that the print media is not the common person or ordinary person's media. Radio is the most popular media in Zimbabwe in terms of accessing information. And ZANU-PF and its, as a resultant of its control on the Ministry of Information, has steadfastly refused to open this sector to the private players. So the dominant media player in Zimbabwe, radio and television, are still in the hands of a few in Zimbabwe. Well, thank you so much, Ashweat Mukundu. I think you've given us a really good, strong update on what's going on in Zimbabwe. He's a journalist and a political analyst from Zimbabwe. And safe travels. You're going back.
Thank you.